Hello, Bethel. This is Paul White, your instructor for our literacy course for all secondary level students. You'll be looking at this video recording in week 2 of our course. I want to do 3 things today, give you a little bit of an introduction about myself, my background. You may have read in the week 1 postings as we all introduce ourselves, a little bit about me. I'll go into that a little more. Then I want to talk about the course, sort of an overview of the course as to how we'll progress from now to the end of the semester in April, and some of the things we typically accomplish and what we hope to accomplish. Of course, this semester is unique. This is the first time this course has been completely online. We have done this in person for years, so I'm excited about that adjustment and see how that works. So you'll be helping me, giving me input on how to make this the best we can in an online format like this. And then finally, I'm going to spend 10 minutes or so providing some introductory sort of mini lecture comments around a PowerPoint that you are going to review for week 2 that'll be central to some of what we're looking at as we introduce the course. So let's start with my background a little bit. You may be aware that I am the superintendent of New Prairie United Schools, just west of South Bend. I've been here since 2015. I joined Bethel's staff on adjunct status in 2016 and have been teaching this course since then. Probably asking yourself, why would a superintendent be interested in a literacy course? My background, I was a secondary level social studies and special education teacher for 8 years before I got into school administration. I was a middle school and a high school principal for 10 years, and then got in central office work, would have been around 2012, and then became the superintendent here at New Prairie in 2015. My interest in this course is the following. As a secondary level principal in Southern Indiana for about 10 years, each school that I was at had significant literacy challenges as it pertained to state exam test score results, SAT, average SAT score lower than the state average. So it became a topic of great interest and focus to me, working with staffs as a whole, language arts teachers, with regard to how to improve these skills with our students. So a lot of trial by error, learned through experience, that probably did more wrong as a principal than focusing on the right things, particularly when you look at research on the topic. So ended up towards the end of my tenures as a principal, went through a PhD program at Indiana State University and wrote a dissertation, decided to write it about this topic, secondary level instruction for literacy development, and learned in those experiences, and ended up focusing on going into schools in the state of Indiana, middle schools and high schools, public schools, that were overperforming their similarly situated peers when it came to language arts performance related to their poverty rate. So went into a collection of middle schools and high schools to study what they were doing differently than the average school. And in almost every instance found that the collaborative practices of the language arts teachers were the significant factor that were improving performance in students. And I'll talk about that a little more as we get a little later into the course. So that's how it became a topic of interest to me. And ironically, that was a practice that I was not investing in as a principal with our staffs. I was focusing on and investing in particular strategies or approaches, which have their place as well. But those collaborative practices are something I'll talk more about in a few weeks. So that's a little bit about me and why you're dealing with me with this course. So let's take a few minutes now and do more of a course overview of where we're going to go and why. First of all, I always think it's important, and some of you have been great about being really honest about this in the week 1 discussion, introduction posting, just really asking the question, why do I even have to take a literacy course? It looks like, I'm not sure any of you are language arts teachers at this point, so it's a very natural, and I've seen it multiple times over the years, where math teachers, science teachers, elective area teachers that are assigned to this course by Bethel, of course, asking themselves, why do I have to be in here? What is the point of this? So the course is set up in a way to really try to answer that question and make this a meaningful experience for you and helpful ultimately in the different content areas that you're working with. So we're going to start with And as you looked at chapter 1 of the course text this past week, it provides a base that I'm going to build on today as to what is the backstory. Why do you even have to take this course? Why has Bethel and teacher preparation programs around the country invested in programs and courses like this? There's quite a backstory to it with regard to not only our national data that we're going to look at here in a bit, related to our secondary levels performance on nationally normed exams. There's also a backstory politically. There's a backstory in terms of our national economy and where it sits in the global economy and future trends and current trends. All those things, you mix them up in a cauldron, and you've got people like yourself being required to take a course like this. So we're going to spend about the first month looking at that history, looking at that backstory, establishing why this is even something you're being asked to do, then transition into a look, not specifically yet at particular approaches in your classroom to develop reading or vocabulary development or writing skills, but to establish a more general base as to what should effective teachers in schools even be doing. According to research, what are the most effective practices and approaches that should be taken to help students learn? There's actually quite a bit available on that. Another thing that has been a great trend in the last 15 years is that research has gotten less ivory tower focused and has gotten into more of a place of, this is what we're seeing in the studies and research that we're doing, and how do we apply it to practical reality? And we will look at some studies that make a really nice attempt to do that. To give us a general base before we get into specific literacy development of what are things you can be doing as a teacher, what should schools be doing that focus on that 25 years of research are showing us have the most bang for our buck and show the most progress. This work is hard. It's gotten as challenging as ever. It's still a great, rewarding field. But there are a lot of challenges. Time is limited. Everyone has a lot of responsibilities and wears a lot of hats in this work. So having an understanding of what are the most critical things I can do with my time professionally in the classroom with students that are going to yield the best results. We are going to spend the next 2 to 3 weeks really looking at that. Once we establish and work through that, then we're going to transition into basically the course will kind of be in 3 phases. We'll start with reading comprehension and what can be done to impact reading comprehension in any secondary level classroom. We'll spend about 3 to 4 weeks on that. Then we'll transition to vocabulary development. Same thing, about 3 to 4 weeks on that. And then we will end the course with a focus on writing development. And what we'll try to do is share approaches and strategies that can be applied to any room, not just if you're a language arts teacher. That then from there, another exciting development is when I first got in this work as a principal, one of the mistakes that we made is we had, in a lot of ways, tried to make everyone in the faculty in a middle school or high school act like the English teachers. And I've come to learn, both from a research perspective and experience, that is a mistake. Those of you that are teaching business or social studies or an elective area or math, you're not English teachers. You should not be asked to be English teachers. And the development has been having a greater respect for your content area. The approach is called disciplinary content literacy. Having more of a respect for the fact you are a math teacher, you are a social studies teacher. So it isn't that we're asking you to be the English teacher, but we're asking you to use your content area and what you're required and expected to teach and help students learn, and incorporate literacy skills and approaches that help you with the advancement of your content area and help us with the advancement of America's secondary level students and their literacy development. Quick example. I'm a math teacher. I'm not an English teacher. However, I know from all the changes in state and national standards in the last decade that there is a heavy emphasis on what's called mathematical discourse, which is a fancy way of saying we want kids talking about their learning, and we want them in problem-solving approaches. We want them dealing with complex multi-step situations, and we want them interacting. We want them in problem-solving situations. We want them in complicated scenarios that they have to struggle to come to solutions and possibilities and answers. Mathematical discourse in a nutshell. So a math teacher is responsible for that. Literacy approaches can be embedded in that. As students have to interact with each other, there may be some writing they would do or some speaking and engaging. A very simple thing I've seen math teachers do is simply ask students to write about their mathematical thinking. Okay, you submitted this response and this approach. What was your thinking? Whether it was the right answer or not, what was your background thinking? So then there's a writing component in that helps us with literacy development. And you're not being the English teacher. You are advancing your focus as a math teacher in what you need to do. That disciplinary literacy approach is a major change and I think improvement and will help all of you from a perspective of, oh, okay, I can get into this. You're not asking me to be the English teacher. Now, at the same time, I hope one of the things you take from the course is that English teachers need a lot of respect. Their work is very difficult, and they are the front line first piece of defense when it comes to literacy development in a middle school or a high school. And then all the rest of us need to come alongside them and within our content areas try to help them as best we can and as practical and reasonable. So the course is set up in a way to try to help prepare you for that, expose you to some things that can help you with that. As we go through those sections of the course on reading comprehension or vocabulary development, we will throw at you a variety of strategies and approaches. Some of them you'll look at videos where people are modeling this, or I will speak in this format and explain, or you'll read about some things, and you'll be asked to make decisions. I think this could work in my class, here's why. I don't think this can work, I think this would be a waste of time, here's why. That's okay. One of the critical things that you and we need to do as professional educators, no different than doctors, is know what all is available out there and then make the best application based on the circumstances of who we're working with. In our case, students. In the case of physicians, it's the patients and their unique history and background and issues. And in our case, it's simply students and their unique backgrounds and issues. So that's a little bit about the course, an overview, and how we're going to set it up to try to prepare you for that. I mentioned earlier, of course, that this is the first time this course has been online. Generally speaking, you will get some kind of video or mini lecture you'll see embedded for me most weeks, not every week, but most of the time we'll do that. Or at the minimum, there may be something I post or write that I want you to react or respond to. Since we're not able to meet in person and kind of engage and learn from each other, the discussion posting, your initial post by Wednesday for attendance for the course, and then responding to a couple of other people. Some weeks I'll say just respond to one person. Last week it was 2 people. This week it's going to be 2 people. Some weeks I will say that you're only responding to me. We've got a smaller group. I think we have 6 in the course at this point. So some weeks it'll be to me, but that interaction is going to be critical to try to set up a scenario where we're learning from each other as well. The course text is critical. You will need to get it. This is a course, I've been in your shoes many times in my life, and I would always come in the first week or 2 and kind of assess the lay of the land. Is this professor serious about the course text, or am I really going to use it? And if I saw that was the case, I'd go buy it. And I'm sure we've all been in the situation where we saw that it wasn't always necessary. I'm not going to buy it. I don't need it. You will need it in this course, particularly on the online version we're going to do this semester. I'm going to have you in the course text even more than, say, maybe when the course met in person in the past. Most of the time, you'll be asked to write in response to a particular chapter or section you're prompted to. There will be some quizzes occasionally. Those will be untimed and open book. It can be a low-stress situation. So that will happen some as well. The text is a great resource. There's a lot of practical strategies in it. I think it's a book you won't be sad to have. You'll keep it on your a lot of our students over the years have actually gone back and referred to it when they're out there in their jobs in their classrooms at times. So I wanted to mention that. Last week I did post a scan of chapter 1, knowing sometimes it's hard to get the text quickly. or, sometimes courses drop an ad and people add at the last moment, but I'm not going to do that every week. I'm only doing that for week 1. You've got to get the course text. You maybe have noticed already for week 2, I've just listed chapter 1 again as the course reading for the week. That gives you more time to get this text, and we're going to build on week 1 and week 2, particularly as we get into this PowerPoint and first week intro lecture. So, which I'm going to go ahead and do now. I'll refer to some notes in front of me at times, if you could bear with me for another 10 minutes or so. So there's a PowerPoint embedded in your week 2 module under resources that's kind of an overview of the national historical problem with literacy development in the United States at the secondary level. And then there's some research about what schools, teachers, and students should be doing to put ourselves in a best position to improve literacy and student learning in general that I'll talk about at the end. So as you're reviewing the PowerPoint, a few comments that I want to make, and I'm going to refer, slide 1 is the cover slide, and then slide 2 just says literacy, a working definition. So I'm going to refer to slides by numbers as we go through this. So that slide 2, literacy, a working definition, pretty self-explanatory, but the point I'm trying to make to you is that literacy is a really wide topic. It can be very difficult and daunting to pin down what should I focus on. And this is part of where it's really tough to be a language arts teacher. You want us to develop reading comprehension, a love for reading, vocabulary development, grammar, and conventions. Oh, you want them speaking as well. You want them technology literate. The term is all encompassing and it really takes in a lot of things. So it's important to establish when we're talking about literacy, it is a very wide ranging topic. One of the things I'm going to ask you to do that's required of this course, and it's necessary for your portfolio for the university, and I will talk about it in more detail next week. There's an end of semester project you'll be expected to do. You'll have 2 options. You'll be able to write a research paper, and it builds on this issue that literacy is such a wide topic. I want you to pick something of interest to you of a singular, very specific topic within the literacy umbrella definition. So if you're really interested in writing, we focus on that. If you're interested in vocabulary development, we'll focus on that. If you're interested in how to assess any of those areas, we can do that. 2 options. You simply do a research paper. I'll talk about length and expectations more next week. That you essentially, between online sources, the Bethel Library, if you choose, that would be your approach. Or I have a collection of books specific to these topics within literacy. I'll intro some of them next week. If some of you are interested, I will either drop them off on campus, you can come get it, or I'll just get it to you in the mail. You borrow it or loan it from me for the semester. And then what you'll put together is a little presentation that you'll send to me. So you'll have 2 options. I'll go into that more next week. And it'll give you a chance, since the literacy piece is so daunting, to try to focus on something specific you're interested in that you can get some practical things that you can use going forward. So, all right, having established literacy just has so much in it to worry about and try to develop. The next piece on slide 3 is, unfortunately, another piece of the puzzle as to why you're in this course. Historically, literacy curriculum and development has been sort of the bedrock piece of what is expected in an elementary school. When we think of reading, we usually think of elementary schools. We usually think of K through 3 classrooms. It's their job to teach them to read. And then when they get to us at the secondary level, our responsibility is we love our content areas to get into a deep dive and help kids really learn a lot about our content. And historically, as you could see on the slide, there's a quote there from a research study that I've got in yellow, that when reformers call for more literacy development at the secondary level, secondary teachers usually say something to the effect of, that should have been dealt with in elementary. I'm not a reading teacher. And what we're trying to say with this course, and the data we're going to look at in a second, is, wait a minute, throw that thinking out the window. We need your help. It can't be the old model of that's the elementary's problem. And the national data is probably the best submission I can give to you as to why that argument needs to be blown up and we need help from secondary teachers. So having said that, if you go to slide 4, you're going to see a chart of what is called NAEP scores from the early 1970s to about 10 years ago. NAEP, what in the world is that? That's a fancy acronym, National Association of Educational Progress, or Advancement of Educational Progress. NAEP is a nationally normed exam that is administered by the United States Federal Department of Education on a every 2-year basis since going back to 1971. They randomly will select schools at all levels, elementary, middle, and high school, and they typically test 9-year-olds, 13-year-olds, and 17-year-olds, or in that age band. They don't test everybody in the school. They will, and if you're randomly selected, you usually get a communication through your state Department of Education, and you are required to have your school participate if you're chosen. In my travels in school administration, I've seen one school that I was responsible for overseeing and working with be chosen, and their 4th graders had to take this exam on that particular year. So let's take a look at slide 4, and I want you to take a look at that line graph data, and you see we've got 9-year-olds and their historical scores, 13-year-olds and 17-year-olds. The number you see there, what is that? That is called a scale score. We won't get into fancy statistical PhD kind of stats course kind of stuff, but just in a layman's term, that score you see there is an attempt to standardize and bring to common understanding the average score of all the 9-year-olds in the United States in pick the year. You know, they've got kind of in 2 or 4 year increments there. 13-year-olds and 17-year-olds for the sake of generalizing, for the sake of study and conversation. So as you take a look at that chart, there's a few trends in that data that I want you to notice. The first would be the following. If you look at the scale score of each of the 3 age levels, and you look at the historical trend in each of the 3 grade levels, going back to 1971 to 2012, it is not hard to notice. First of all, you have the natural course of things that the scale score of a 9-year-old isn't as high as the scale score of a 17-year-old. But that's not really what we're looking at. As you look within each age band, it is noteworthy and easy to see that the average scale score of 9-year-olds in the United States has had a pretty nice climb from the early 70s to more recent time. However, and even at age 13, there has been some progress. But with regard to 17-year-olds, going back to 1971, this nation has made almost no progress in the average scale score of a 17-year-old in the United States. That's alarming. There are a lot of reasons for that. We're going to take a look at a few of them in a moment. But that piece alone is something we want to point out to you to help you see in terms of why nationally there has been this push for courses like this. And that old school model of you teach it in elementary, I focus on my content, this data point would suggest that wasn't working. Okay, let's keep going. Slides 5 and 6 have just some more recent data from the last 5 to 7 years. And then finally on slide 6, I have provided a link to our national website that the Federal Department of Education runs called A Nation's Report Card. And it is a link to the most recent results from the last year or so. Excuse me. And I want you to take some time and do a deep dive on that link after you review this video. The writing response for this week is basically based on your response to this lecture and PowerPoint. And one of the pieces is sharing your reflections and what you notice when you do a deep dive on the most recent NAEP data. And I've been talking so long, my computer logged me out. Looks like we're still good. Okay. So, and what you're going to find when you look at the most recent data is we haven't made any more progress. And actually, with the COVID piece and learning loss, one could argue we've even given up some previously gained ground. So take a look at that, do a deep dive, and then you'll be writing on what else that you notice. So that NAEP data is a critical data and reference point as to why we need a course like this. So from there, if we look at slide 7, and I've got it titled, "The Data Suggests We Have a Problem at Secondary Level." I have a list of studies that are about 10 years old at this point about some of the impacts and results of the approach that this nation has taken with literacy development. And I want you to take a look at that collection. They're all alarming. They're all pretty scary stuff. You're going to be asked to write about the one that bothers you the most and why. In my case, the two that jump out to me, well, they're all concerning. But the fact that the National Endowment for the Arts have reported that less than a third of our middle schoolers read daily, that's pretty concerning stuff. Only half of 17-year-olds surveyed by NAEP read more than a few times in a year or not at all. Is it any wonder that we have some of the results that we have? And then at times when you compare our results internationally, in terms of developed nations, we tend to be lagging and behind a lot of our similarly situated developed nations with regard to academic advancement and literacy. However, it's interesting, probably the one that bothers me the most in terms of that international comparison, it's actually true to say, and has been true to say, that if you look at our literacy data and remove poverty, and you compare our high-performing situations, high-performing students that are not from poverty backgrounds, and you compare them with students internationally, all of a sudden, we tend to be at the top of those studies and results. But then when you factor everything into account, including poverty, that is where we tend to fall back. So clearly that would lend one to say that we would have to ask ourselves, or should be asking ourselves, some tough questions. Why would that be the case? Normally if we're in person, I would stop and we would probably talk about this for a half an hour. There's a multitude of reasons. Clearly, this would suggest that one student's educational experience in the United States, depending on where you're at geographically, where you're at in a community and the resources of that community versus where you're at somewhere else, clearly it's not the same. I realize that comment might be, some may disagree with that, some may be offended by that comment, but from a research statistical standpoint, something's going on. I always share the following in class that this is anecdotal, this is just me, but my wife and I do a lot of traveling. I didn't mention her, she's also a school administrator and a licensed school librarian, and is also very embedded in this work of literacy development. In our travels around the country, I can't help but notice that every time I drive through a city in this country, in almost every instance, the school buildings within the city typically tend to be older, tend to look like they were probably built anywhere from the 1930s and 40s through the 1970s, give or take. And then when you get out to outlying areas of a city or urban area, the buildings are always usually within the last 15 to 20 years. And when you look at how funding typically works, like in the state of Indiana with regard to dollars per student, historically this state used to give more money for students in poverty situations as a poverty factor. And the state legislature in the last 10 years has decreased that factor. So schools and school systems and communities dealing with more poverty have lost revenue because of that. And you can't help but think that those pieces all can have a factor in So for me, that data point, the Program of International Student Assessment, #1 in reading worldwide for schools under 10% poverty, but we're last worldwide when you look at schools with over 50% poverty. That has always been troubling to me. And we'll ask you in the response this week, which of these data pieces bother you the most and why, and share that. Okay, let's transition to slide 8. Couple things I want to point out here. So one probably would ask themselves when you think back to the slide we looked at with that historical data from the early 70s, 9-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 17-year-olds, why is the skill score improving at the elementary level, but it's not at the secondary level? One argument has been made is that it's kind of a situation you get what you emphasize in life, and what you focus on eventually improves. No different in this case. Slide 8 shows you a collection of things in the last 15 years that most of them are elementary focused, and give you examples of, you put your money where your mouth is, you get what you emphasize. The federal government has been putting substantial money from a grant, if you do this, we will give you this standpoint. And there's a bunch of examples listed there. A lot of elementary reading development has come from, and of course, little distraction, my phone's going off here. I'm going to shut it off and be back. Okay. A lot of money has been put in elementary literacy development, and not nearly as much at the secondary level. And a lot of that focus has been on incentivizing best practice literacy and reading development approaches at the K-5 level. And I can't cite near as many examples of that with secondary reading development. So there's been a lot of work in helping elementary teachers become better at teaching kids how to read and write. And I can't submit to you a lot of similar examples where that money has flowed to middle schools and high schools. Go figure. You may be aware the state of Indiana requires 90 minutes of reading instruction on a daily basis at the elementary level. A lot of work has been put into making those times the most productive possible. Elementary teachers, if you ever get the chance to see it, or if you have already, it is amazing what they orchestrate and manage in 90 minutes, and the number of back to literacy being a catch-all phrase, reading, writing, speaking, all the different things that go on, vocabulary development. It is an orchestrated circus at times when you go in one of those rooms and all the different things going on at once. So there's no question when the data I referenced earlier, and when you think about our national economic trends, which have trended to more high tech, more literacy based, even if you are in a trade or a manufacturing situation, there is a deep literacy component in terms of understanding what you're dealing with, manuals that you have to be able to navigate, read, and communicate about related to how to run equipment, how to run advanced manufacturing processes. And then where we sit globally has led to this massive push at the national level, politicians, business leaders, that there needs to be more literacy development that goes through our K through 12 experience, not just at the elementary level. So if you go to slide 9, that is an example of how all these different pieces came to bear on a national level, particularly politically. I mentioned the Federal Department of Education earlier. If you think about the NAEP test earlier, it is important to note that in our system of government, in our federal system of government, there is a separation of powers, and the federal government in the Constitution does not have the power to educate stated anywhere. So that power falls to states. So the federal government actually has very limited authority on how kids are educated from one state to another. So the federal government typically utilizes money in grant funding where it can, Title I schools, if you've heard of, to try to influence and shape. One of the things that happened about 10 or so years back, as all of these, our national data regarding literacy, the global economy and its changes. That slide about all of the problems, slide 7, all of that concerning secondary level literacy data. There became a massive push to, we got to do something about this. And one of the things that happened is that the National Governors Association got involved in this because states and governors do have a lot more authority and influence directly and more quickly on education. And governors around the country came together and started talking about our standards for students in the classroom are not strong enough. We need to expect more out of kids in schools to develop kids' literacy skills. So what you know today to be the National Common Core Standards Movement came out of the work of a bunch of governors coming together and trying to influence educational policy state to state. And you see that visual there where most of the states came up with either the full Common Core original version or did an edited version, which is what Indiana ended up doing. Indiana kind of played both sides of the fence. Indiana adopted Indiana Common Core, and if you really study it, they took a lot of Indiana standards, they jammed in a lot of Common Core, and then we ended up with even more to worry about. And that was kind of a political thing that the state navigated. The interesting part about the Common Core Standard Movement, why it matters to this course, is that it had a component for an expectation of literacy development for all secondary level teachers, even the ones not teaching language arts. And that is something we'll look at in a couple of weeks. More specifically, if you're not aware, every area at the secondary level, there is some expectation of embedding literacy development within your content area as you're moving it forward and developing it for students. So that's where that National Common Core piece comes into play. So finally, to close, so you've got a couple of more slides that are about some studies around school factors, how to improve learning in general and literacy, how to improve what teachers can do, and how to improve where students should be. I think what I'm going to do at this point, because I'm almost to 40 minutes, I'm going to stop here. I'm going to go ahead and in next week's, I'm going to speak in this in more detail next week and record a similar lecture and share it in the module for week 3. I'll also be talking about that end of semester project in week 3, and I'll just kind of put those together in a video. Chapter 1 in your course text do speak to some of these approaches of what schools and classrooms should be doing. So when you're writing in response to Chapter 1 and to me and what I've presented today, you can focus mainly on the course text and not as much as citing this end of the PowerPoint. We'll go ahead and make that a piece of week 3. So don't hesitate to contact me. The syllabus has my cell number, my Bethel email. If you text me, I usually get back same day. With my role at New Prairie, it can be very unpredictable when I'm available and when I'm not. A text is a great way to let me know you got an issue or a question. I try to check email at least once a day. You could also go that route as well. So I look forward to working with you. New approach and format with this course. I'm looking forward to your input on how this course works from an online standpoint. I know everybody needs life flexibility, but we also want to make this a good course that you're going to be able to take a lot going forward to help you in the classroom. So we hope we figure that out, and your input will help us with that. So, all right, thank you. So this concludes my comments and mini lecture for week 2, and look forward to seeing you next week.